Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with Ask Dave, the series in which I attempt to answer your incredibly interesting, intelligent, and perspicacious questions with as much interest and intelligence and perspicacity with which you ask them. Sometimes I will, and sometimes I'm afraid I won't, but let's hope. The question in this case was sort of directed at me, but it's a more general issue, and it's really very interesting. It's, do we imprint on the first recording that we hear of something that we like, presumably, that we really like, and what does that effect have on us as we hear other versions, and how much does that first one stick? And I would like to talk about it both personally and also from what I've read from your comments, because your comments are a gold mine of fascinating information about people's listening habits and, what turns them on and turns them off and how they've addressed exactly this issue. And this is what I can sort of make of it. There are three possibilities when you first hear a piece of music that you really love. The first is that you are completely rigid in your tastes and nothing anybody does later is ever going to sound as good. And, I can't say there's anything wrong with that, because the point is that you should get pleasure from it. And if you continue to get pleasure from the same performance of the same work, then it's not wrong. It's just a fact. It's a fact of one's own personality. Some people never want to hear another version, and if they hear anything to the extent that it differs, it's wrong. And some people have that attitude, but I think those people are really in a minority. They really are. In the second category, the issue is really one of access. And the access is going to determine what your reaction is. In other words, a lot of you have commented when I do these Dave's Faves talks, for example, or some of the other repertoire videos, that you don't have that many recordings of the work in question, or you only have one and you like it and it's good enough for you. Well, again, there's no arguing with that. We don't really know what might have happened had people had the exposure to many, many more performances of the same piece. Maybe they would hear one that would blow away the original one. I don't know. We can't know. We can't know unless somebody actually starts to listen and then says, oh, wait a minute, I only had one, now I have 27, and that's how I feel about them. But I do think that, what governs exposure? Well, the amount of time you have to listen, how much you care about hearing different versions of something, how much money you have to spend on acquiring multiple recordings of the same thing, which I can't really insist that anybody do. Because if you're happy with what you have, why should you spend more money? You can go listen to something else. So that's another sort of category that people are in, and I suppose most of us are in that category, and we're sort of sitting on the fence as far as it goes. We want to be happy with what we have. We have an interest in being happy with what we have. We don't want to piss away money for nothing, and we don't have unlimited time. If you're a critic like I am, or a fanatic like I am, and some of you are, you will go and listen to all of these things. And as a result of that, we get into the third category, the people for whom the imprinting version, the first one, no longer matters at all. I'm one of those people. There are very few recordings that I imprinted on that I still think are among the best, or that I still particularly love. There are some. And I want to give you an example, and this is just speaking personally, but the first time I heard Haydn's 88th Symphony was with Fritz Reiner in the Chicago Symphony, and it was the piece really that turned me on to classical music. I fell in love with it. That and Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony with William Steinberg, which I talked about before. So I always loved Haydn's 88th when I heard Reiner do it. On the opposite side of the disc, on the other side, was Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. And I wasn't as fond of that as I was of the Haydn, but I had that performance in mind. That was the first time I heard Mozart's Jupiter Symphony. So move on a few dozen years, or a few years, not dozens of years, but a few years later, I heard other people's versions of Haydn's 88th. I heard Dorati, I heard some others, and I no longer liked Reiner's. I thought it was good. I mean, when I heard it, I had that familiarity, that breath of, the first flush of discovery. But I thought other people just did it more persuasively. And so I put that away and I never really liked it. The Jupiter Symphony, however, was somewhat different. And it was very interesting. The reason is because Reiner's performance is a very swift one. And I always liked Haydn better than Mozart anyway. And so I liked my Mozart played more or less quickly. And I had been reading about George Sell and how fabulous he was in Mozart, and Bruno Walter and all those people and how great they were in Mozart. So I got Sell's Mozart and I put on his Jupiter Symphony, which is supposed to be the acme of all Jupiter symphonies. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I thought it was too slow. I really did. I preferred Reiner. And I still love Reiner. I love it for its uniqueness, but now I adore the Sell. I really do, because over time, as I heard more performances and I accumulated more knowledge and sort of sat and listened and understood the music better, I came to appreciate performances that were closer to the Zell-Walter sort of school than to the Reiner school. But I still love that Reiner because it was the first one I heard, and I love his tempos. I really do. I think they're just amazing. The execution is stunning. I love it. I love it. It was my Imprint version. So that's one of the ones that stuck with me. But it may have stuck with me because it wasn't the best performance, if you know what I mean. And so when we're imprinting on a performance of something, there's always the possibility that the one that we imprint on is so fabulous that even though we may hear something different or there may be others that we like, it's never going to measure up to something that's just impossibly great. That can happen. It does happen. We have to recognize that, you're not going to imprint always on junk. I mean, you may imprint on something that's astounding. And so you'd be perfectly right to regard everything else as second best. And so that's another possibility. That could always happen. It's a very, very interesting and difficult question. But generally speaking, and I'm speaking personally now, I'm not sentimental about performances that I imprinted on. I mean, I imprinted, like I said, on that Steinberg Pastoral Symphony. It's a very good pastoral symphony. The record wore out. I got others. I never looked back. As important as that was for me, my first Mahler 2 was the Stokowski. It had just been issued on RCA. It blew me away. It got me into Mahler. And now I listen to it, and first of all, it's Stokowski, so he reorchestrates half of it, and there's tempos are weird, and things are pulled about. I don't like it. I like it because it was the first one I heard, and it has certain moments that I think are stunning. But as a Mahler 2, nah. My first Rachmaninoff second, I think, was Alfred Wallenstein on Seraphim. And it was a good Rachmaninoff second. It had traditional cuts. I never particularly, I loved the work, but I never particularly had any affection or loyalty to that particular performance of it. I heard others and I liked them just as much, or I liked them better. So there you go, right? I mean, I can keep going. We can make the list as long as we want. But I think that the idea of people imprinting is more a matter of just happenstance and convenience than anything serious about it. If I walked up to someone who had one recording of something that they claim they like and said, "Hey, I'll give you a dozen for free. Just give them a listen, see what you think," most people would listen, and most people, I think, would be open to changing their mind if that's the way something else strikes them, and if not. I can't say much more than that. But there is a corollary to this discussion, which I also thought was equally fascinating. Someone asked just a couple days ago, why is it that so many of your recommendations were all recorded between, the dates he chose were 1958 to 1962, but in that area, from the beginning of, say, stereo, from the mid-50s or late 50s to the early 60s. And he made a list of conductors, and it was Munch, and it was Bernstein, and it was, those guys. You know the list, right? And I thought about it because I don't care when things are recorded, basically. I don't pay any attention to that, and that's what I said. But it's a fact. And I think the fact, how real it is, as a sum of everything that I've reviewed, I don't know. But But let us just say, for the sake of argument, that this observation is correct, because I do believe that there is a nexus of fabulous conductors from that period. And you know who they are. You've got Walter and Reiner and Sell at the end of Toscanini, and and Fritzsche and Bernstein's making his first big push, and Munch and Monteux, it's just an endless seeming list of absolutely amazing conductors who did phenomenal work in that period. And since then, it's not that everything has been bad. There's been phenomenal work since. There truly has, but not in such abundance. And it's easier to perhaps to discuss that when you think of the world of singing, because there was the Wagnerian period, the post-war Wagnerian school, and the pre-war Wagnerian school. You had all these amazing singers, and they were all singing Wagner, and now they're gone. I mean, now we have Lisa Davidson. Thank God, someone who can sing Wagner. You get one, and of course they burn out in like 2 weeks because everybody wants to hear them immediately, and because there isn't anybody else. So it's a seller's market. But on the other hand, we have a billion great Baroque singers and Handel singers, and you can schedule a Handel opera at the drop of the hat, and it's going to be fabulous. Please forgive the siren out there; something's going on. But that's the way it works. It seems to come in cycles. But with conductors, I think there was a special phenomenon. In that particular period, you had a unique confluence of several factors. You had the advent of stereo, which encouraged the labels to re-record everything. The entire repertoire got remade in stereo. You had a bunch of absolutely astounding conductors, and we lived in an era when conductors were rulers, were dictators, and they were able to mold the orchestras in their own image and their own musical image, and they did. And they did it with ferocity and sometimes with sadistic malevolence. Other times they were less vicious. But the orchestras were theirs, and you had, and I think this is what's really critical, much less travel. So much less travel. I mean, when a conductor had an orchestra, it was their orchestra. And they worked with that orchestra. And yes, you had a couple guest conductors during the season, and occasionally they traveled a little bit. But by and large, a conductor conducted a full season. He planned the entire season, and he made the orchestra play the way he or she, in this case it was a he, wanted them to play. And they had no choice. They either did it or they were shown the door. We don't have that anymore. And as long as we don't have that, the chances of us finding performances that we value are considerably less. Because what is it that we're valuing? What do we claim is good or great? Generally speaking, there's a certain technical level that everybody has to meet. But that's not the hard part. They have to do it while showing some kind of personality, of characterization, a form of identity. I mean, a conductor has no personality. A violinist does. I mean, a violinist plays the violin. You can sometimes tell who the violinist is just by the tone of the violin, or the oboe, or the whatever, or a string section, or something. They have their personalities. The conductor's personality is only reflected by what he does with the orchestra. And in order to develop an orchestra with personality, assuming the conductor has any, which is a bit of an assumption, they need time. Often lots of time. That means they have to be willing to stay in one place and teach the orchestra what they want it to sound like, how they are going to be reflective of the conductor's interpretive personality. And first of all, unions and all of that nonsense and the need to be nice and not shriek and scream and carry on like a maniac, that mitigates against that kind of interaction, that kind of dominance of one personality over that of the orchestra. So that's an issue, but the rest of it is just time. Today, when a conductor is music director of an orchestra, he does what, 16 weeks? Maybe. He gets paid his full salary, and he goes off and conducts the same stuff with different orchestras all over the world. How much time has a conductor got to impose his own creative personality on the ensemble? He has 2 or 3 rehearsals, gives a concert, takes off for the next stop. And then he comes back home and he'll conduct a few weeks of concerts there, and then he's off again. You can't develop that kind of simultaneous technical quality and uniqueness, personality in the way that people are playing now, the way that people operate. I mean, you see some of it. You see some conductors who are fiercely loyal to their orchestra, but even then, it's hard because you want to have celebrities. You want to have the other big names. You want to have everybody come to your town. The entire system today is designed to prevent developing the kind of individuality that I think makes the performances of that era, recorded in such good sound, so special. And that may be why so many of us, certainly me and so many others, listeners, so many other listeners, naturally gravitate to that period in recorded history. It wasn't because I imprinted on those performances. I didn't. The 58 to 60, I was born in 61. So I didn't even know that these people existed until the 70s. And by the time the 70s came along, I was listening to what was new in the 70s. And like I said, I didn't initially like George Sell. I didn't know who these people were. So I didn't just hear them and say, this was the greatest. It took years and years and years and years of listening and practice and experience before I began to hear performances. And then it just naturally seemed that the ones that got preferential care, in my eyes, were those. And I think that's the answer. It's as close to an answer as I can come to giving, but it was a very interesting question, and I thank you for asking it. So keep on listening, friends. Take care.